expulsion from the Faden source rock. And the later stage we call alpine chain or Atlas compression events create a foreland basin in the Gulf of Hammamet area. Expulsion from the Faden source rock. Generated and the later related structural traps, structural geometries, structural highs, and these are one of the major target areas that we are going to do exploration activities. And also it's encouraging more and more sedimentation in the foreland basin area. So we are the new model for hydrocarbon generation and expulsion and migration to from the Faden source rock to the Albion source rock to the Miocene reservoir is that I will show you some later stage slides that it will be a result of the juxtaposition with the source rock, juxtaposition of with the reservoir rocks. In the following slides, I will show details. So the main contribution will be Faden source rock, and our reservoirs will be Birsa reservoir, and it's called in regional scales the oil group. Our target that we are going to do exploration and drilling in these prospects. So this is one of the seismic sections. It goes from south to north, and it's a combination of the 2D seismic line plus 3D seismic lines. And on the south, we have seen the Baraka field, and it has been confirmed with the hydrocarbon presence in this Miocene section, Birsa equivalent Miocene sections. And on the north, we have a Mamura field. It has been also confirmed that in here, that the presence of hydrocarbon in this younger section, Miocene reservoir sections. So we are here between them, and we call the name as a Huta prospects. And structurally, we are located at a structural inversion, mega inversion structures, and you can see that even the effect of the inversion in the younger sedimentation in here also, in here and in here. So it's a structural inverted trap. And one of the key issues on this seismic section is that here is the brown color is we name it Faden source rock. And you can see that, and another major tectonic event is just before the Langian event, Langian time, we call the Langian unconformities. It's more regional, and then it goes down and truncated all the Abiot plus Faden source rock also. So, and our play concept is that this area, the area where the Miocene, thick Miocene successions has juxtaposed with the Faden source rock, and the main expulsions and migration will be done by through this carrier bed and up to the structure of our prospective area. This is our play concept, and we are going to drill in this area, and it's a structural high. I will show in the following slides some more detailed maps, and in this succession is more than 2,500 meters. It is it's a combination of full series of clastic, we name it. But before this classic sedimentation, and we call it iron grab carbonates, it has been deposited in the top of the structural highs on this area. And this iron grab carbonates will be another secondary target reservoir. We will test also in this play concept. Again, as I mentioned that this thick sedimentation in the Miocene section is a result of the alpine chain and alpine or Atlas collisions, and it's generated foreland basin, and the result of this compression event, huge amount of sedimentation has been deposited in the depot center of the basins. So this is the Cenomanian Santonian age of the North African regional map. And then you may see that we are talking about during Mesozoic time, there's a big extensional events happening in the North Africa area. So this mega extension event create a big subsidence deposit center area, and this is the best location for source rock sedimentations, especially for Faden and up to the Budabus source rock sedimentation in the North Africa. And this is the area we are doing explorations, and we think that the main contribution for the source rock will be the Faden source rock, because on the seismic section, previous seismic section, you may remember that, I did highlighted that the Budabus sections has been eroded by Langian unconformity most likely. But Langian unconformities still goes down and cut to the Faden Albion source rock also. So this area, the juxtaposition of the Faden source rock with the Miocene reservoir will be point of where we can have expulsions and migration of the hydrocarbon generated from the Faden source rock. So when we look at the seismic sections, most of the Eocene source rock Budabus has been eroded, and but we still have a juxtaposition with the Faden source rock with the Miocene clastics. So on this picture you can see the last year we did with the ETAP group fieldwork studies on the Cap Horn Peninsula area. This is one of the pictures that we grabbed in this area, and the location is in here. We call it Jebel Adjaf area. Probably, maybe tomorrow we are going to have a field trip to visit this outcrop. So this outcrop, you can see the Faden equivalent source rock sedimentation. Its characterized very blacky shales, well-packed blacky shales formations. And when we look at our target reservoir, and we name it as a Ul group, and it can be subdivided into the many fascias actually. We cannot say the formations, fascias. And the fascias transition from the continental to the deep marine fan or sedimentations. In the shallower section, continental area, it's called as a Begliga formation, which is characterized very fluviatile continental sedimentations. And in the slope fascias, name it swap formations with like a channel sedimentation, incised valleys, and on the slope area. But in the deposit center area, its name is at the swap formations with fan and sheet sand characterized. And in this our block area, we are targeting the big Birsa reservoirs, and we divided this Birsa reservoirs in three main subgroups. We name it Birsa 1, Birsa 2, Birsa 3, and with that interpretation, detailed interpretation on this units, and our volumetrics has been done based on this context. And these are the key marker, key seismic event. It can be marked and it can be interpreted on the seismic very clearly. And then this is another example of field trip we did last year that shows the the Begliga cross-bedding fluviatile sedimentation in outcrop, and its location is in the Cap Horn Peninsula area. And thanks, by the way, thanks for the ETAP group that's help us to complete these field trips. It's a kind of collaboration teamwork with ETAP. And then this is another map, shows the Gulf of Hammamet, main structural frameworks, structural features in the Gulf of Hammamet. What we notice in this structuration is that we noticed the main lineaments, northeast, southwest oriented lineaments are the, we call the structural high, and mainly anticlines characterized as anticlines. And then these anticlines is the controls the topographic features of the basins. And the younger sedimentation related with the extension events, and this extension deposit extension events, this generate the horse and gravel horse systems. These are the main sedimentary delivery points to the basins. And when sediments deliver to the basins, mainly we noticed that seismically, we can see the very nice onlapping to these paleostructural highs. The pre-Langian unconformity structure highs has been onlapped by the Miocene sections. So, and on the seismic sections clearly, and this is the thick Miocene seismic sections is our target for the explorations. And this is just cartoon geologic sections. It shows that how the thickness variation in the Miocene successions. In our Huta prospective area, the thickness of the Birsa sections is more than around 2,500 meters. But when we move to the east, so it is getting thinner. So the good things for our prospective area is that it's quite thick reservoirs. We will penetrate, we will test it. And another event is that, as I've mentioned, that we have very good model that this reservoir section has been juxtaposed with the main source rock in the basin, and we have a high probability of migration charge to these reservoirs. So, and the main trap configuration, as I mentioned, that it is the structural inversions, and in a later stage, this Miocene section has been inverted. So this structural high inverted structures are the main prospective area on this basin. We will test it. And then here is the model of structure trap. And in the successions, we will not even, the upper section, we will test multiple reservoir of the Birsa equivalent reservoirs. And below the successions, as I mentioned that, we have eingrab carbonate sedimentations. If you have a good facies of the, like a grainstone or organic buildup facies of the eingrab sections, it's gonna be good reservoirs for our prospective area also. So this is one of 3D seismic sections. It goes through our prospective area, Huta area. The well location proposed Huta prospect well location is gonna be here. And then in this section, the first key marker we named as Messinian events. And the second one is the swap sections. And the bottom one is the Langinian unconformities. So we are targeting this classic sedimentation plus eingrab sedimentation at the top of the Langinian unconformities. So one thing you may notice that there is it's highly faulted. Mainly these are faultal extension faults. And these faults are the result of after inversion events, is the result of the relaxation phase of the structure traps. So this is the kind of more detailed depth map for the top Birsa sections. Do we have time?
2 minutes.
Oh, sorry, I will finish, okay. And depth section of the Birsa sections. And the Huta prospect is gonna test the highest point of the structures. And on the east, we have Mamura field. Structurally, it is deeper, little deeper than our prospective area. So, and then it has been confirmed that they had hydrocarbon presence in this structure. So we are kind of in the up dip of this structure. And we will test the multiple Birsa reservoir section on the structures. And these are the contours, caused the low case, mid case, and high case that we did volumetric calculation on this prospective evaluations. Okay, again, this is the geologic sections we derived from the seismic sections. It shows that the combinations of the structurations, and you may see the Birsa equivalent successions thinning in the east and getting much more thicker in the west, and we will have a much more thicker sedimentary succession, Birsa equivalent succession in this prospective area. So in summary, it's a new concept that highlighted the juxtaposition of the Miocene reservoirs with the Faden source rock in the basins. That will encourage the migration pathway for this prospective area. And then for our model, the main contribution will be Faden source rock, maturation and expulsion from Faden source rock. And as I mentioned, the trapping mechanism will be transpiration-related, mostly alpine collision event-related inversion tectonics will be our trap configuration in the basin and in our prospective area. Thank you for listening, and I will be happy to get your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan, for this interesting presentation. So we have time for one question. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this nice presentation. And good luck.
Thank you.
It looks very nice and very
Yes.
prospective. So I have a small question and a comment. For my question, I liked your subdivision on the tectonic major events that affected northern Tunisia.
Mm-hmm.
You decided to propose for us a Mesozoic up to Eocene extensional rifting movements.
Yeah.
And this is new, believe me, in the mind of a lot of geologists. We continue to think that there is a major compressive event before.
Actually, this contribution comes from my colleague, Jan Peter.
Yeah.
He's not here. He has a very good experience in the North Africa and Italy area. He knows the main tectonic events very well. His model belongs to him.
I'm not a structuralist, but let me tell you, I agree. I agree with this interpretation.
Thank you.
And the map you presented for Giro 2005, in this paper, he continued to indicate in the chart that there is Aptian, Albian, Austrian phase. But with my group now, we have a lot of argument, and we will present soon this work. We don't believe, and we believe that we continue in rifting phase. So I am very happy to see for the first time this interpretation.
Thank you.
My comment is about your stacked reservoirs. And also I agree with the three main reservoirs, Birsa and some sandstone body with Sawaf and then But I don't know why you presented a steep model in your reconstruction. I like the final when you presented things as a ramp.
Exactly, you're right. But I copied from the publications, so it's approved in the in the scientific by scientists.
Yeah.
You're right. So it's not it's exaggerated. Vertical scale exaggerated. I agree with you.
Yeah. That's a small comment
in
about
in
your
this slope, you will mostly
because
bypass the swath sections. Actually.
Yeah, all the sandstone body corresponds to shallow coastal marine,
right,
with tidal influences and sometime during sea level faults. So the sandstone depressed to the down part of the system.
Yeah,
and
yeah. Basin floor fan or sheet sands style.
Exactly, yeah. And I invite you to assist to the presentation of Madame Narges Lash at 12:15 in the same room, and you will see the model. It's very interesting work that confirms that what you presented.
Okay. So thanks so much. By the way, just before the lunch, we have another presentation by Dragon Oil, and it's going to be presented by by Jan Peter. And this is exactly related with he's going to more detail explain the migration model of expulsion and migration model of hydrocarbon from source rock to the reservoir systems. So it's just before the lunch break. We will be happy to see you there.
Thank you. We will go to the third communication.
Thanks so much for.
Downward migration as a potential mechanism of hydrocarbon accumulation in the early Cretaceous surge and island plays of the Kaboudia block, Gulf of Hammamet, offshore Tunisia, by Messrs. Mouchou, Doublé, Arab, Hsaim, Aisawi, Gizani, Bjawi, Al-Maharsi, Shabi, Manna'i, Bouhmadouche, Lamouri, Belabed, Shenet. So, this presentation, the speaker of this presentation is Mr. Michou, Nicolas Mouchou. Dr. Nicolas Mouchou is an exploration geologist specialized in petroleum system analysis and basin modeling. He has been involved in several geology integrated projects as well as specialized studies. After PhD graduation in 2009 in geology and the postdoctoral position at Total, Mr. Nicolas Mouchou integrated the BASIP from lab team where he acquired relevant experience in basin modeling, structural geology, sedimentology, both in active and passive margin setting.
Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. So, I'm going to present you a work realized this year with between NUMID and BASIP from lab. So, we'll discuss about the downward migration as a potential mechanism for HC accumulation in the early Cretaceous Serge and Alam plays of the Kaboudia block. So it's located in the Gulf of Hammamet, offshore Tunisia. As an introduction, this is location of the Kaboudia block. So you can see here. For this study, we also got any information from some wells located around the study area. So it's represented by gray round. And this is on the right, a synthetic lithostratigraphic chart of the area from Apsian to present. And the subject of this presentation will focus on Serge and Alam reservoir and Muela source rock located from Apsian to Albo-Cenomanian time. The objective of this work was first to realize an evaluation of the petroleum system in the Kaboudia permit. To do this, we realized a 3D petroleum system modeling in the Kaboudia permits in order to address the HC migration processes related to Cretaceous plays. In this petroleum system, it includes timing of hydrocarbon generation, expulsion, migration, the mapping of the kitchen area, the definition of migration pathway, hydrocarbon charge and preservation, the fault definition, and thermal evolution of the basin. Very quickly, because we are going to talk about the paire d'Alsansum processes. So first of all, to have a paire d'Alsansum migration, we have a condition. The downward migration may occur when the capillary pressure to enter in a layer for an HC drop is less important in the stratigraphic layer below the organic rich layer than above. And this is this scheme is a little bit complicated, but it can be summarized like this. You have a source rock here, so it's a source rock and a sill, and you have a reservoir just below here. The blue line is the water pressure. The green line is the HC pressure in the reservoir. So the green line you can see here, and you have a red line which is the HC pressure related to the source rock. You have two important points. The first point is this point. This point is the maximum capillary pressure in the source rock. It's the this point represents the maximum pressure that the source rock, the sill, can undergo before the fluid leakage appears. And you have also this point. This point is an equilibrium point between the pressure of the hydrocarbon in the reservoir and the pressure of the source rock. So when this source rock expelled fluids downward toward the reservoir, this red curve here will start to shift toward the right in this direction, okay? Consider that this point is fixed. This point doesn't move. And so this red line shifts toward the east, and this limit, this equilibrium limit here, migrates along the line, down, and when we arrive more or less here, in this area, the pressure is about the same than the pressure here, and it means that you reach the maximum filling of your reservoir. If you continue to try to put some HA fluids inside the reservoir, a leakage appears in the seal. Okay, so you have a maximum filling of your reservoir. So quickly, this is a flow chart used in the basin modeling. So first step, we have a data collecting and analysis of this data. So we look at the regional setting, the report, the geochemical information, and the seismic interpretation. So it's classical in any study. Second step is the model building. So we built a model, a static model, so a model at the present day. We built the present day geometry. We put some lithology inside the model. Third step, sorry. I don't know why I have a zoom. Okay. The third step, we define facies, source rock, and fluid configuration. So in fact, we built a lithofacious library. So the lithofacious library is a library with lithologies and with petrophysical parameters. So in fact, we looked at the facies we put in the model, okay, but we put some petrophysical parameters to these lithologies. We also define kerogen kinetics. So we have to define the kinetics for the source rock. The fourth step is the boundary condition through time. So we have to define the temperature at the top of the model and the bottom temperature in the model. This temperature evolves through time in the model. And the last step consists in simulation and calibration. So we do several simulations until we are able to calibrate the pressure and temperature information. And after, we also calibrate HA expulsion and migration process. So this is a long step because we can realize several tenths of simulation to be consistent with our set of data. This is a view of stratigraphy in the model. So you can see the big red arrows correspond to the seismic maps we got for the model. So we have 7 seismic maps, plus at the top we have here the topography. Based on this skeleton of the model, we put some interlayer in the model. So this is all this layer, okay? And you can see that we have 23 layers. We also add some layers below this stratigraphic column from Apsian to the basement. So at the total, we got 44 layers in the model. This is an image of this model. So if we focus on the Alam and Serge reservoir, so just to remind you, Alam Serge reservoir are Apsian Albian system. And so if we look from the top to the bottom, we have at the top the Farden Seal. Below Farden Seal, we have the Alam reservoir. Below Alam reservoir, we have what we call Alam Seal, but in fact, this Alam Seal is the seal of the Serge reservoir. If we focus on the two reservoirs, it's interesting to see that the Alam reservoir is mostly a claystone to the western part. It becomes a marl to the eastern part, while the Serge reservoir is mostly composed of dolomite in the southwest and from claystone to the eastern part. Moreover, the surge reservoir is probably, or at least partly, eroded toward the east. Now we have the reservoir, but we also have to define the source rock. So we are focusing on the Muela source rock. Muela source rock is in the Farden formation. To evaluate the Muela source rock, we have several information. We have, first, we realized a carbolog analysis, so it's a basic methodology to estimate the net thickness of a source rock and its TOC content. So this is an example below. It's a well correlation with carbolog. So if I zoom here, we have the Muela source rock. Sorry, we have Muela source rock here, and you can see that in this interval, we define two intervals with rich TOC content. And so, in fact, we track this source rock in the basin, and we define so a net thickness of the source rock and an average TOC for the source rock. We also have rock eval data and biomarker data. Thanks to this data, we know that this is another example. We know that the Muela source rock is more or less a type 2-3 source rock. Moreover, for this study, we realize we built a specific compositional kinetic to represent the Muela source rock evolution with thermal cracking. So I can, okay, sorry. And to one of the last points, we also take into account the faults. So in this study, we got two sets of faults defined on the seismic interpretation. We define one minor fault set and one major fault set. In fact, what we call minor fault set is only faults where the displacement is very, very limited. So when we intersect these fault planes with the model, we are able to define specific characteristics of the facies around the fault sets. Second point is the time of activation of faults. So in the Kabudia permit, we estimate that the faults are active first during a period of Aptian-Albian time. It's not really clear, but globally, these faults are active during the source rock deposition, the time of source rock deposition. And we have a last phase with major motion, which is a Miocene period, where we can see very important motion along faults. But between these two periods, the activity of faults is not really important, or at least not detectable on the permit. And to finish, the thermal condition, it's really important in basin modeling. So for basin modeling, we need thermal condition at the top and at the bottom of the model. So to do this, we have to define sea bottom temperature, and we define heat flow at the base of the model. So the heat flow at the base of the model is defined with a lithospheric model. If I start with sea bottom, how to estimate the sea bottom temperature? What we did is that we use surface temperature reconstruction through time, and we use a thermal zonation profile taking into account the water depths to estimate the temperature at the sea bottom during geological time. For the lithospheric model, we use, so the lithospheric model is a model with 3 layers, an upper crust, a lower crust, and a lithospheric mantle. The global thickness of the model on the permit is 15 kilometers thick, and thanks to this model, we are able to take into account the thinning and stretching history of this crust during time. So, because we know that we have tectonic phases during Triassic, Cretaceous, and Tertiary periods. So from a present-day thickness of 15 kilometers, we arrive in the past at a model with a crust estimated to 35 kilometers thick. The thermal calibration. The thermal calibration has been realized on 9 exploration wells. You can see here, it's the orange dot on this map. This is an example of calibration on the left. You can see the black line is the simulated temperature. The red points are the observed data. Okay, and the idea is to able to fit with an uncertainty the temperature in the model and the observed temperature. If we put all the model temperature in a graph, we can see that in the Kabudia area, all the geothermal gradient ranges from 35 to 40 degrees by kilometer, which is globally important. We do the same with maturity calibration. So on the left, we have some example of calibration on Visionite. So the black line is always the simulated line, and the dot here, the green dot, are the maturity data. If we put everything in one diagram, we see that we are able to, we have calibration inside the data set point of maturity calibration, which means that globally, the thermal model in the past is consistent with vitrinite reflectance observed at wells, which means that globally we have a good confidence in the burial history modeled in our basin. Now some example of the downward migration. So this is on the right a map of the Alam reservoir, and I show you a section, a north-south section, globally located here, and this section is here. So on this section, I only represent the Alam reservoir, the third reservoir, and I remove the layer above and the layer below, just for a better display. So you have to imagine that just above the section, you have the Muela source rock. And I start here at the bottom, at T0. T0 is what I call the peak oil generation. In fact, it's the time where the transformation ratio is around 50% of expulsion, of transformation, sorry. You see that at T0, I have some blue colors here in the toppermost layer, which means that we have some hydrocarbon saturation in Alam, the Alam reservoir. And if you continue in T1, T2, etc., you see that this saturation in the Alam reservoir continue, but you also observe that you have some lateral migration inside the Alam and reservoir, et probably Alam Seal et Serge reservoir, and you have migration until the hydrocarbon reach a trap or structural tops, and you see that we have some blue, green colors, which means that the HC saturation increase. And so if we go toward present, we see that the saturation in this accumulation increase, okay, until present day. To synthesize this mechanism, the mechanism we suggest for the migration process, you have to look at this schematic cartoon. We have first, you can see in green, it's the Muela source rock at the top, okay? So first, you have maturation of the source rock and downward expulsion of the hydrocarbon, which reach the Alam Serge system, okay? Second step, your fluids migrate laterally in the reservoir and reach structural tops, structural features, and fill first the Alam reservoir. And in some specific condition, if the structural closure is good, you have possibility to proceed to a secondary downward migration from alarm to surge reservoir. Okay, it's what is displayed here. So this is globally the mechanism we suggest in the Kabudia permit. Another slide, but which show more or less the same thing. So on this slide, I display the same thing than the previous slide, but which is interesting, it's to look at this last image, which represents a section at present day. Okay, here you have a kitchen. Okay, and if you go on the right and on the left, you see that you have some accumulation here. You have a little bit accumulation here, and you have bit saturation here. And which is interesting is that we are able to represent some known saturation on the Kabudia permit, but moreover, we are able to reproduce the good quality. We have the same API modeled and the same API observed at wells. So, which means that we can have a good confidence in the model. A last image, I think this image is interesting to observe the role of the alarm surge system in the migration of the fluids, because the alarm surge reservoir are the reservoir, but they also play a role of carrier bed, because the alarm surge reservoir is globally tight. It's a tight system, so it plays the role of reservoir as structural tops, but in the other place it can play the role of carrier bed. So this map represents the saturation of the alarm reservoir. It's only the alarm reservoir from T0 to T5. T5 is the present day. And it's interesting to see that at T0 we have a saturation which appears in the alarm reservoir, and when you go in T1 you see that you can observe a lateral migration from both sides of the kitchen, and this system continue, etc., etc., etc. So it's interesting to see that fluids are generated in the kitchen, and after the fluid go in the alarm, and alarm after play the role of carrier bed, and fluids are distributed along the platform. And when these fluids reach a structural tops or good reservoir quality, you can observe some HC saturation in the Kabudia permit. To conclude of this, I think it's really important to think that we have a system on which we have a source rock which is deposited just above a reservoir system, the system alarm surge reservoir. This alarm surge reservoir is a tight system. Wait, okay, I've finished, sorry. So it's the last one. The alarm system play the role of carrier bed, but also play the role of HC accumulation. So it was important to show you this slide. And to conclude this last image, because we also test the impact of the faults. First of all, this is the two periods of activation of fault, phase 1, and phase 2, okay? Phase 1 is active, is active at the time of deposition of the source rock, and phase 2 is active here during Miocene. This graph represents the transformation ratio of the source rock through time. Okay, we have three set of points: kitchen 1, kitchen 2, kitchen 3, and it shows that in the two kitchen, the transformation ratio of the source rock starts after the deposition, but is globally finished before the last step of fault activation, which means that if we consider that faults are permeable during the activity, in fact, the molar source rock has expelled all its fluid between during the inactivity of faults. So we consider or we suggest that the faults are not a major process to explain the accumulation in alarm surge system. This is the conclusion. The 3D petroleum modeling reproduce the observation in the Cretaceous play of Kabudia permit. So we are able to reproduce known saturation and HC quality. The model fault did not contribute or seems to not contribute to HC migration toward the alarm surge play. And the modeling suggests that the downward migration is an efficient mechanism which is able to explain this accumulation. Okay. Thank you and sorry for
Thank you for this excellent presentation. We have time for question. Yes?
Thank you. I just want to ask you, from where did you get the pressure data? Are all the pressure data coming from wells, or have you been able to take pressure data from seismic also?
No, all the data, pressure, temperature, come from wells. In fact, so they come from test or from final report, etc. It's a real measured data.
And even in the basin area, you have wells, deep wells that can take pressure from the basin area also? How many wells have been taken in account?
Most of our data comes from the Kabudia permit, and we have some information with our partner for the well around the area. But most of the model is calibrated on the data inside the permit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is about the source rock distribution.
Yes.
In Kabudia permit. We know that generally all the wells doesn't present any real potential in terms of TOC and petroleum potential. My question is, first of all, the distribution of the main parameters. We use it same TOC for all the block, or there is a map.
Okay.
And the second point is we know that in the surface in central Tunisia, that the main source rock is present in the grabens, okay, with the deposition of the Fahdin Mwalla source rock, and is controlled by the structural of the Albian-Apsian period.
In fact, the carbolog give us some control point. Okay, we have some wells where we can observe a potential in the Mwalla source rock, but we have not information everywhere on the Kabudia permit. So we applied some concept. The first concept is that the TOC is more important and probably it's probably more important in the kitchen, in the graben. So which means that our TOC is not constant. We define TOC on the carbolog, but in the kitchen we increase the potential of the TOC, and globally we try to extend the potential of the source rock in the other area, but with geological concept. We don't have necessary information on all the permits. But what is clear is that on the Kabudia permit, we have several wells with clear identification of organic rich layer in this Fardon formation, and we associated this organic rich layer as the Mwalla source rock. So we have a good information on the net thickness and TOC content of this source rock in the wells, and after we extrapolated this information inside the block. So if this information are defined on the platform, we we use this information, but we try to increase the quality of the source rock, for example, in the kitchen. So there's real information, but there is also some concept, because we have not the information on all the area. But we have real observation at wells. So we know that this source rock exists.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. First of all, I would like to emphasize on the point that raised by our colleague Ziad on the development of the source rock Mwelha, because what we know even from the outcrop in central Tunisia, it's the Mwelha source rock is developed on the sealed basin. So it means when at the time of the deposition of the source rock, we have a structural configuration. So in the high zone, there is no source rock, or very low content in terms of TUC, and in the graben we will develop a lot of more TUC content. So I'm afraid that using the geochemical data inferred from wells doesn't really give the exact image on the graben. No. So I'm afraid that the quantity of the hydrocarbon modeled, it's underestimated. And my question is for the sedimentary gap between the Aptin and the Albion, because we have the Alam, it's lower Albion to middle Albion, directly overlaying the Aptin, let's say, Gargazian in age, it's upper Aptin. So this sedimentary gap is in terms of when you built your 1D model, it's attributed to orogenic phase or sedimentary hiatus.
Okay. Yes. No, it doesn't work. Please, can you put the presentation? Thank you. Which one? After? Yes, this one?
Yeah, my question about the origin of that sedimentary gap between the Aptin and Albion when you built your 1D model, the origin.
Yeah, we suggest that this gap is due to motion, so an orogenic mechanism, but offshore toward the east, probably, I don't remember the name, close to Pantelleria or something like this, but very offshore, because what we observe is that if we look at an east-west section, we observe that our surge formation is more and more truncated toward the east. So it suggests that something at the east of the block has been exhumed, or something go up. I don't know if it's a big motion or not, but we suppose that it's not a big motion. And so we suggest that, in fact, this erosion between Serge and Alam is a minor orogenic motion somewhere at the east. But when we look at the Kaboudia permits, we cannot see very important tectonic events between the Alam and Serge. So we think that in this area it's very minor, but the origin is probably orogenic.
But in seismic section, we do so in the Alam, it's overlapping the top of the Aptin.
Yeah, because probably that the bathymetry on the east of Kaboudia was less important. I have not schemed to show you, but we suppose that there was something on the east of the Kaboudia block which were at which was exhumed, or not exhumed, but which was surrected compared to to this area. So it's difficult to say if the tectonic which is responsible of this is important or not, because in the Kabudia area we cannot observe very big effect of this event. But we have an erosion for sure.
Yeah, Murad, just a small comment. Yeah, look at your interpretation about the Apsin-Albian transition. You have the major discontinuity indicated in red there.
Yeah.
Okay? And you interpret as extensional activity. And I agree with you. We have a lot of data, not seismic data, but in outcrops confirming your interpretation. So once again, there is a continuity in the distantive and extensional events during Cretaceous, and perhaps there is no any Apsin-Albian compression. So I agree with your interpretation.
No.
But I would like to draw your attention that the top of the surge is Albian, is early Albian. And your alam is Albian too. And the unconformity is intra-Albian, and this is the major event of the demise of the platform by extensional event.
Okay. Yeah.
Just
Thank you, Professor Mohammed.
S'il vous plaît. Bon, je vais parler en français. Concernant justement cette discordance, la dite discordance autrichienne, on a longuement discuté de cette discordance. On sait qu'actuellement, les études, il y a des études qui ont montré d'autres résultats, mais pour nous, qu'il s'agisse d'une phase tectonique compressive ou distensive, comme on dit, il y a une continuité du rifting, comme on le dit, c'est vrai, mais nous avons pensé, est-ce que c'est-à-dire les dépôts qui ont été érodés, est-ce qu'ils vont influencer sur notre modèle? Ils n'ont pas influencé. On a une érosion de 100, 200 mètres, 300 mètres, maximum 400 mètres. C'est-à-dire quand on a fait notre modélisation, ça n'a aucun effet sur la modélisation. Pour ce qui est des datations de l'Allam, et je sais qu'il y a des nouveautés, et que le Allam, il a changé, peut-être il a été rajeuni, ou je ne sais pas. Eh bien, ça, il faut le prouver. Il faut le prouver parce que les études apparemment ont été faites dans la région de Terjeruine. Mais ailleurs, il faut le prouver. Qu'est-ce que je voulais dire aussi donc, cette phase, elle ne nous dérange pas beaucoup. Mais ce qu'on sait, c'est qu'à la fin de l'Apsien, on a eu une structuration. Notre prospect, il a été structuré à la fin de l'Apsien. Comment l'expliquer? Ça, on vous laisse la discussion.
Dernière question ou commentaire.
Voilà. Donc, ma première question, je vais la poser en français. Monsieur Mohamed Soussi, je suis intéressé de connaître, c'est-à-dire l'âge de cette, c'est-à-dire vous avez des serges et les albiens. J'aimerais bien s'il y a une référence bibliographique, un travail publié. J'aimerais bien le savoir. C'est-à-dire, il m'a dit le top de serge. But seismic, you mean the surface of the surge is really urban, or there is the surface, or?
The surface is intra-alpine.
Okay, because the seismic.
Yeah, it's a new concept. Remember, yesterday there is a paper, there is a presentation about this campaign. Yeah, and we know that in the mine, in the root of the mine of Tunisian geologists, we need this phase to develop a prospect, early prospection of interesting oil. Okay, and we want to maintain this idea because it's prospective in terms of people interest. It's okay. But several arguments in outcrop showing clearly there is tilting blocks. And what we call the bar formation is intra-alpine, and it's a direct record of an uplifting and the deposition in continental situation. So we are changing the interpretation based on direct data and observation to the field.
Thank you.
Okay, so, but this doesn't distract our petroleum concept, you know, because we're dealing with hydrocarbon and like in the...
Just to say with my colleagues, we see in the Kabudi.
Thank you. Please, you can continue the discussion outside the session.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The problem that we know that geodynamically from Aptian to Albion, the regional stress have been reoriented. And in this reorientation, we have some zones in extensions and some zones in compression. Thank you. Okay. The next presentation.
Thank you.
In the thema, we change the thema. The thema is hydrodynamics and seals. Is the speaker present here? Okay. So, temporal fault juxtaposition and seal analysis, reducing risk in structurally complex prospect, Riley, Anderson, Ashesh, and El-Ash.
I think I'll just...
Mr. Riley, Mr. Katal Riley is a structural geologist who has been working with Midland Valley exploration since 2050. Katal obtained his PhD through University College Dublin, where he was working with the fault analysis group and GNC science in New Zealand, examining the faulting activity in the offshore Taranaki Basin. Since joining Midland Valley, he has been involved as a consultant in structural projects across a range of global tectonic settings, as well as aiding the development of fault displacement and seal analysis software tools. Katal's interests range from fault timing and seal capacity to fracture predictions based on structural history.
Thank you very much. Thanks for staying. I know it's basically the coffee break now. I think there's an error in the program where this is 10 to 11 on the program, and the next talks after the coffee break are 11 o'clock. So appreciate you being here. What I'm going to talk to you today is about fault seal analysis and how variations in fault seal can be quite important when we're thinking about the charging and the trapping and the development of hydrocarbons. The company, as the chairman mentioned, is Midland Valley. It's recently been acquired by Petroleum Experts, so we're now Petroleum Experts, but you might recognize us. Can I do it this way? Yes. You might recognize us by the software that we produce, which is called Move. Midland Valley has made Move software for about 35 years, and we also do consultancy work, and the projects that I'm going to use as case studies today are from some consultancy and research that we've done. And I'm primarily going to be showing the use of the kinematic modeling and fault analysis tools. So at the beginning, I'll introduce you to fault seal analysis for people that are not maybe very familiar with the concepts and the methods that we use, and talk about how time can be important when we're thinking about fault seal. Sequential restoration basically means going backwards in time, taking every deformation event into account, including compaction, faulting, folding, isostasy, thermal subsidence. So I'll briefly describe that before then going on and talking about the two case studies where we've implemented this workflow, namely in the Gulf of Gabes here in Tunisia, and another one from the offshore Taranaki Basin in New Zealand. And the purpose of these projects I'll describe in detail at the appropriate time. But to talk about fault seal for a moment, generally when we're doing fault sealing analysis, there's two primary types of fault seal that we can group the methods into, and that is juxtaposition seal and fault rock seal. Juxtaposition seal simply means we have a porous rock on one side and something like a shale, something impermeable on the other side. So we have great big pore throat sizes in, say, a sandstone, and then it's juxtaposed against a shale, and the capillary entry threshold pressure difference means that the fluid can't migrate across the fault and it's trapped on one side of it. Fault rock seal uses the same principle, but you can have a sand against a sand or a porous rock against a porous rock, and the movement on the fault has entrained shale or clay within the fault zone, and it has made the fault zone itself impermeable or less permeable, and the transmissibility is reduced basically. One of the most common methods used in the industry to estimate fault seal is shale gauge ratio, and I'll be talking about that for one of the projects later. And shale gauge ratio is simply the sum of the proportion of shale in a sequence of rock that has moved past the fault divided by the throw on the fault at that point. So it's a ratio between 0 and 1, and the traditional idea is that values below about 0.2 represent something that's not going to seal, and then sealing capacity increases with increasing values after that. Once you get beyond about 0.3 or 0.4, you can be pretty sure that it's going to seal. So obviously faults move, and as a result, because juxtaposition is based on fault throw, and because shale gauge ratio and the other fault sealing predictors are all based on throw, the changing throw on a fault is going to mean that you're going to have differences in the capacity of a fault to seal. There are very few hydrocarbon reservoirs that we know about that are charged in the present day. So if expulsion from our source rock has taken place at any time other than the present day, then looking at fault seal just now is not really a valid method. We have to take into account the fact that the juxtaposition and all of the fault sealing properties may have changed from the time of expulsion to the present day. Our migration pathways may have changed. Our trap might not have existed. Our trap might have leaked before the most recent phase of fault movement. So understanding the history of fault movement, and therefore understanding the history of juxtaposition and seal, can really give us confidence in whether or not a trap is likely to be charged. And to do this, we use sequential restoration. So as I mentioned, sequential restoration just means going backwards in time, but going backwards in time using geological rules and principles to take into account all of the effects of deformation. So in the example that's playing on the screen, we initially remove a layer and calculate the compaction that we need to restore in the underlying layers, which in growth faults you're going to have differential compaction, so that's again going to change the relative positions of horizons and the juxtapositions across the fault. We take into account the faulting and the folding. Isostatic adjustments will move it up and down, and thermal subsidence in areas where that's appropriate. So we combine all of these to accurately restore models to past geometries. And even in this model here, you can see how the juxtaposition, say, of this green unit changes through time, and once we get back to this time step, it starts to juxtapose itself, whereas at the present day, in the next image, it really doesn't. So it can be quite important to consider these things. So I'll show you this with two case studies. The first one from the Gulf of Gabaz, and this is some work that we did with DNO Tunisia, which is now obviously Panoro, working with Hedi and Mohamed Alouche, who some of you may know. And the prospect is the Jawhara prospect and the Sfax permit, which is approximately here. I'm not going to go into the stratigraphy because we've seen the stratigraphy of Tunisia in probably every talk so far, and the deformation was something that we modeled as well, and it obviously occurred over several episodes associated with the interaction of Africa and Europe. So the Jawhara structures, there's this sort of elongate arch, high, and it's cut by a series of approximately north-south trending faults. The arch itself is approximately north-south trending, and there's been a number of wells drilled, and the results from the drilling campaign didn't really reflect what was thought to be happening. So the role of faults was thought to be quite important. So we carried out a project with a number of primary aims. Number one, to make sure that the interpretation was all right, to validate the interpretation, understand the structural history by carrying out sequential restorations in 2D and in 3D, and to consider the fault seal and any variations in that through time. So the project was quite involved, and for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on the 2D sequential restoration, the 3D restoration, and the fault seal analysis, and the results from that, rather than the rest of it. And in terms of the 2D sequential restoration, we took two cross-sections through the field to do the restoration on, and the cross-sections looked something like this. So this is from southwest on the left-hand side to northeast on the right-hand side, and you can see the stratigraphy down the right-hand side of the slide. This is about 3 times vertical exaggeration. And the area that we're interested in is over here, and you can see that there's some fault offset. It's not huge, but there are faults that do completely offset the reservoir and the source. So the main reservoir is the Bareno Dulab, and the main source in the area is the Balul. The restoration, when we carried it out, I'll take the seismic off, you can see that after we restored down to the top of the Katatna, which is about 30 or 33 million years ago, the source rock, which is the Balul in sort of this pale yellow color, and the Bareno Dulab, which are combined in this pink unit, on both of these sections are completely juxtaposed against one another. So at the presumed time of expulsion, we have complete juxtaposition. And if we go back a moment to the previous slide, we have some juxtaposition at the present day. Now obviously this is just on 2D sections, so it only gives us a snapshot, a cross-section through the model. We also need to consider how that might change along the length of the fault, because deformation will change along the length of the fault. So we did a 3D restoration as well, and it follows the same process as the 2D restoration, taking all of the events into account, including compaction, faulting, folding, isostasy, etc. And to demonstrate some of the results of this, we're looking at depth maps here in the present day of the different layers through the 3D model. And you can see the arch that I mentioned before. It's north-south, or maybe slightly north-northeast, south-southwest. However, when we did the restoration down to the time of expulsion to the top of the Katatna, you can see that these are the depth maps that we result in, and the orientation of the arch actually rotates to much more of a northeast-southwest orientation, and that really helped us with relating the timing of the formation of that arch back to the regional tectonics, the northwest-southeast compression that probably formed the arch. So that's one of the results that came out of the sequential restoration that was quite neat, but the purpose of what I'm talking about today is the variations in displacement and juxtaposition. So as I said previously, the displacement wasn't huge, and when I restored to the top of the Katatna, you can see the differences here are reasonably minor in terms of magnitudes of displacement. These are magnitudes of displacement color mapped onto each of these fault surfaces, and it's a bit backwards. Fault 6, 7, 8, and 9 are right to left here, but on the map it goes fault 6, 7, 8, and 9. And if we look at the juxtapositions, they're again very, very similar between the present day and the time of expulsion. This is the key down here. So the red colors are reservoir on reservoir essentially, and we have reservoir on reservoir juxtaposition right from the time of expulsion to the present day. And we can look at that in more detail. You can see that there are some minor variations on some of the faults, and we have some juxtapositions that exist at the present day that don't exist at the restored levels as well. But ultimately, it was found that the change in the sealing properties of the faults shouldn't play a major role in the compartmentalization of these parts of the Johara prospect. And I'll revisit that in the results later, but I'll move on now to the second case study where the fault displacements are much bigger. And for this, we're going to go to New Zealand and the Taranaki Basin offshore the west coast. So it's New Zealand's only commercially producing hydrocarbon province. And the field that we're going to look at is New Zealand's biggest field. When it was discovered, it had more than 4 TCF of gas. It's mainly a condensate field, actually. And displacement is active on the fault at the present day. The fault in question is the Cape Egmont fault. So we're zooming in on the field. Here's the outline of the hydrocarbon water contact on a depth map of the top reservoir, and you can see that it's bound by this fault, which is about 60 kilometers long. It's called the Cape Egmont fault, and it's the field is located in the footwall of the fault. Despite the fact that it's a really big field and it's been discovered for the last 40 odd years, 50 years, very little is known about how it was charged, or there's a lot of debate, I should say, about how it's been charged. So publications over the past 15 or so years have proposed multiple different sources for the hydrocarbons found in Maui, from 100-kilometer long migrations from the north to migrations north then south around the top of the fault, and migrations from the west from very small source areas actually. And there's problems with some of them. The closest source area is just right on the other side of the fault, which is the Maui source area. But for a long time it's been believed that the fault acts as a seal, so the hydrocarbons can't get across it, because there's been some work done on whether or not the fault is sealing. So let's take a closer look at the fault. It's about 60 kilometers long, as I said. There's about 3 kilometers of offset on some of the deeper units, and the majority of the slip has been accommodated on one big slip surface, and then the northern area is more disparate, but the primary fault looks like a single surface. Like I said, it's active today, and it actually offsets the seabed. And this is what a cross-section through the field in this area. So right where the field comes up against the fault, here's a cross-section through it. And we can see our hydrocarbon accumulation here in the green reservoir. The hydrocarbon water contact is there in black. The source is way down here in the hanging wall for the Maui field, and the equivalent reservoir is just above it. And above that, we've got about 2.5 to 3 kilometers of mud. So there's no migration happening up through those, unfortunately. So at the present day, yes, it looks like the fault is sealing. Nothing's going to get across into this crystalline basement, and nothing is going to get up through these muds into higher units to then come across into the field. And if we look in 3D at that, sorry, do you want me to go back, Professor, so you can take a photo? So, like I said with the previous example, we do need to look in 3 dimensions at this. So if we look at this small area, and this is where the field comes up against the fault, we can see that colored in yellow here is sand on sand juxtaposition. I don't know if you can see any yellow, there's very little if any. And the top image here is shale gauge ratio, and the scale is here, like I said, below 0.2 it's going to leak. As it gets more and more red, it's definitely going to seal, and it's quite red. So present day, the fault is sealing. However, the seabed is offset, the fault is active. The movement in the last few million years has been quite dramatic. If you're familiar with the area, you'll know this, but if you look at these horizons here, the top few horizons, they're in the Pleistocene, and they're represented by these huge thickened packages across the fault. So there's been several kilometers of movement in the last 5 million years. And if we focus on the area in this red box and do a sequential restoration, so decompact and restore the fault offsets, you can see that once we get back to the top of this blue unit, which is N50, it's about, well, it's between 3.5 and 5.5 million years, we now have the reservoir juxtaposing itself against the fault just 5 million years ago. So we know that expulsion from the Maui subbasin and the hanging wall of the fault started before 20 million years ago. There's a bit of debate as to when. Some people say 40, but at least 20 million years ago, it was pumping out oil and gas. And at 5 million years ago, we had direct juxtaposition across the fault. Again, this is just a cross-section, so we had to look in 3D to see if there was any significant variations. So we did a 3D sequential restoration. Here's just 3 time steps with a depth map for the top reservoir colored. So we, not the top reservoir, for that same N50 horizon, the 5.5 million year old horizon. And again, looking at the present day, we've virtually no sand on sand juxtaposition and very high shale gauge ratio values. When we restore to about 1.7, we start to see a little sand on sand. Again, it's not very much, and shale gauge ratio is still quite high. It's almost certainly still sealing. But when we get back to that N50 level, which is between 3.7 and 5.5 million years, we can see there's a significant change in the shale gauge ratio values. We have quite a lot of greens and yellows values below 0.2, and in the juxtapositions, we've got quite a lot of yellow down here. There's quite a lot of values below our values that represent sand on sand juxtaposition. So to sort of tie that all together, I'll first go through the results of those case studies. So in the Jarhara prospect, the faults juxtaposed the Balul source and the Barreno Dulab reservoir units right from the time of expulsion to the present day. So they're not interpreted to prevent a significant barrier to migration. If we went further and did some quantitative shale gauge ratio studies, or maybe looked at the effect of the present day stress field as to whether the faults are going to leak hydrocarbons along them or up them rather than just across them, we might get a better insight to what's happening there. In the Taranaki Basin, at the present day, the Cape Egmont fault is sealing and fluid can't get across from the Maui subbasin to the Maui field. However, by doing this sequential restoration in 3D, we see that a significant area of the fault is basically open to cross-fault flow between 3.5 and 5.5 million years, telling us that the Maui subbasin is a valid source for the Maui fluids. And to wrap that up in some kind of conclusions, doing sequential restoration gives us a much better understanding of the structural evolution and the temporal variability in that. You saw that arch in the Sfax pyramid rotating, and that told us more about the tectonic processes that formed it. And fault seal analysis tells us about whether or not faults are likely to act as barriers or conduits to flow. So by combining those, they can give us insights into how the behavior of faults in terms of their sealing capacity and migration of oil and gas can change through time. And anywhere where you've had expulsion before some fault movement, before the present day, you want to look at what the faults were doing at that time of expulsion and at every time between then and when you want to find the oil and gas, between then and the present day. And obviously we've developed software tools to allow these workflows to be done all within the same model, and by combining those we can reduce a lot of uncertainty in our exploration and save ourselves a lot of time and money drilling dry wells. So I need to acknowledge that the restoration, the fault analysis, and a lot of the interpretation was done in the MOVE software. I'd like to thank Panoro for allowing us to present the Tunisian work, and New Zealand Petroleum and Minerals for the New Zealand work. And if you are interested in this kind of stuff, we do have a publication in Marine and Petroleum Geology from 2016, I think, about the New Zealand case study. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation related to seal faults. If there is some questions, Afif. He's working on seal faults.
Oh, really? Okay,
So
well, thank you very much.
We will stop the session here, and thank you for your assist. Problem in Tunisia.
Yeah.
Just for fault behavior.
We have a great problem in Tunisia. I presented this yesterday. We have a huge amount of source rock.
Yes.
And a huge volume of generation. But in the tops, in the wells, we have nothing.
Why not?
Small amount of barrels. And application there is billions of barrels.
So it must be there. Where is it?
Okay. He work on a fault corridor Tunisia inside for seal faults.
Very well, and you?
PhD.
I'm with Raphael in Libya.
Okay.
I know your company is Edinburgh.
Yeah.
UK. Because we're based in the UK too. Paul Street, London.
Ah, very good. So do you work in London, or do you?
Yeah.
Ah, good. Do you use?
And we will start at 11:50 with the third presentation. Third one. Yeah. Reservoir source rock evaluation and 1D basin model of East Mediterranean Oligocene by Mr. El-Murshidi. Okay? Donc, you have time to drink another coffee. Yeah? حاجة الأقل في الحكاية هذه اللي هي وهي توكد الفيكشنستي ولا سبيل
Non, c'est plutôt distribution et
كيف في الحكاية هذه ولا جوست انسكريبسيون برك هكا وكالعادة معناها ادمنستراتيف وكا شكون اللي في ليتاب سيريبت غادي هذيك هي ما هذيك به هاتي انت مثل محمد السوسي sur l'audiovisuel في خط الشاطئ
نخدم على الغريب
الكونسيسيون غريب على شفت العدروس غريب ولا هذاك ودي اسامي كات وان هذاك موجود كات وان وغريب وان اوكي اخذ عندي ثم بنيه عم ثنائي عم ماستر عم ثنائي في عمل شنو اللي تم خدمت على زون خدمت ايفاليوشن خدمت بون انتربريتاسيون جوريديك سيسميك فهمت ولي ريزيرفوار موديليزاسيون باش تعمل ستاتيك ولا باش تعمل ديناميك باش تعمل ديناميك ديتو تعمل به اوكي وكان نلقى واحد نبعثهم سينو هذيك القطعه اللي جات اليوم كلمت فيه من عندي من وزاره الصحه اوكي Les deux premières présentations, malheureusement, ما خلناش. شكون؟ اي توانسة ما جاوش. قلنا لهم دي لي دوبي راهو واحد من صفاقس والاخر من ليبيا، اللي من ليبيا كلهم ما جاوش ابارامون. وجاي. ماشي. Ladies and gentlemen,
the agenda, location map of study area, general stratigraphy section of the area of interest, structure setting of the area of interest, structure stratigraphic correlation, seismic data along the area, shore and onshore is from Miocene and Pliocene. So this study is dealing with the Oligocene sediment, how this sediment act as a good reservoir, and also how this sediment act as a good source rock. The area of interest, the stratigraphic section of the area, we focusing on the Oligocene age. Oligocene age extended about 11 million years, from 23 to 34 million years, divided into lower Rubelian and the upper is Shattian, is a passive fill age, and is Oligomiocene fault, showing forward to the center area of the study area and then go to thinning again. It also shows